Good morning. So I hope you really enjoyed yesterday, and having spent some time yet really exploring that whole idea of navigating uncertainty in a sort of a really broad context. Today I really wanted to zone in terms of, well, how do we create resilient organizations where individuals and leaders are able to thrive, to really take advantage of opportunities that challenging situations present? And I thought it would be useful to again explore a little bit in terms of context, a little bit about, what do we understand as what it really takes to build organizational individual resilience? And then what are the specific things that we can do that really create that environment such that you can take advantage of opportunities? So let's start. Now, when we talk about organizations, I think that in itself is just worth unpicking a little bit, because oftentimes the metaphor for organization still remains the machine, where there's the leader at the top turning the wheel, the levers all click through, and out pops results at the bottom. And yet we know that that model doesn't really work particularly well, and that really organizations, maybe there's a clue in the name, are actually much more organic. They're like ecosystems. And I think that, again, that reference to nature gives us a wonderful opportunity to really think about how ecosystems respond to times, particularly times of stress, and what opportunities that presents in terms of how we can really set ourselves up to thrive even in challenging conditions. I think it's also worthwhile thinking in terms of the context of, having said that organizations are like ecosystems, well, what's in there? There's you as the leader or future leader of your organization. There's your whole team. And then usually you've got some kind of board and some kind of oversight. And I don't know what it feels like for you, but sometimes it can feel that as the leader, you're stretched between the two, trying to serve those. And I think there's a really interesting thing in terms of, well, how do we actually think about that differently so that we're balancing that dynamic, so that we're not just thinking about what the team needs from us, but what do we need from the team? And similarly, in terms of relationship with the board, I don't know about you, but I've certainly been in times where, particularly when it's challenging, I felt that I have to be the person that's got all the answers. And when people ask you, what's happening about this, what's happening about that, the voice in my head is going, oh my gosh, you haven't considered that. You haven't thought about that yet. You haven't done that yet. And that can become incredibly stressful as a leader. And so I think that being able to reframe that actually we all have needs within this system, and to also really think about the role of the leader to be able to move from us being the hero, the me that has to sort everything out, to being the catalyst who is able to spark and support the right adjustments within the ecosystem to allow people to thrive. So that just reframing in your mind, I think, is important. But I also wanted to explore a little bit in terms of actually how our brains work, because understanding that within organizations, particularly in times that are really quite challenging, I think is really critical for us in understanding what are the strategies that actually work, because it works with how our brains work as we build resilient organizations. So in terms of our brain, and I'm going to massively oversimplify, so apologies to anybody who is a brain scientist in the room, but effectively we've got our two different systems really. That's Daniel Kahneman's work. It's much more complex than this, but let's go with it. We've got our limbic system, which really is the one that controls all of our basic systems, and also just protects us really. So deals with all that fight, flight, threat. And then we've got this wonderful sort of prefrontal cortex that is the human brain that's developed all of our thinking and rationality and ability to make the decisions. So we've got these two different layers. Now, our prefrontal cortex is the one that we were talking about yesterday. This is a massively powerful processor. It takes in, it filters, it uses our past experiences, our past learning, all of those different things to create our unique set of filters to look at all of those 56 million bits of data, to make sense of them, to actually help us to make decisions. And that all happens in the blink of an eye. So our subconscious is actually making many more decisions than we know. Now, that sort of thinking brain, it loves to make sense of things. It loves patterns. So actually it likes certainty. It likes stability. It likes structure. It craves those things. So one of the things that you may or may not have noticed with your team and also with yourself is that as we've gone through this particularly unusual period of massive change and uncertainty that's affected all of us and how we live our lives, is that how our brain has then responded to trying to seek out that craving and that craving for certainty has led to some really unusual experiences for a lot of people. Sometimes, certainly at the beginning of the crisis, people have just had that desire, right, if I can actually fix and order everything and race around and get everything sorted, if I can be the person who's stabilizing things, that's how I will actually meet my brain's need for certainty. For other people, it's like, well, if I just go really quiet and try and avoid everything, then maybe it will all stabilize. Oftentimes, a lot of people have experienced this thing that actually, as the brain is really struggling to fix uncertainty, almost your prefrontal cortex, it just goes into overload. It can't cope. And so a lot of people have experienced this kind of cognitive fog, where things that used to be easy and simple for people to work out, to work through, suddenly just become a bit hard. And that, from a confidence perspective, can be really, really debilitating. And it's why we're seeing many people struggling through the current situation and that building over time. So lots of different ways, and there's loads of science on this. So if you're interested in it, then do follow me on Twitter, and I'll be sharing out some links of things to explore. But understanding that in terms of how your brain works, that looking for certainty, and also just in terms of some of the connections, give us some really vital clues in how this wonderful organism that is our brain, that's part of this whole ecosystem, how we can really build that resilience from the inside out. So let's move into that. This whole idea of how we build organizational and individual resilience. So there's been a lot of research now at an individual level, and I think what's great is that you can see how this plays out at an organizational level as well, that there are really sort of 4 key areas that you can work on, which I think is really important, that can actually build your resilience. They're about your adaptability, your growth mindset, your ability to see any situation as an opportunity to learn to grow, rather than that fixed mindset, which is, I'm not good at this, I can't cope. One creates that capacity to be able to deal with whatever's thrown at you. The other can leave you with that real feeling of helplessness and doom. And actually that trait translates at an organizational level. Carol Dweck, who's done a lot of the work on this side, she's actually done her most recent research really looking at this, saying actually in organizational culture, you can actually have the culture of genius, which is very much the expert. I know all the answers, you're good at this or you're not. Those kinds of cultures, versus the developmental culture, which is, we can experiment, we can learn, we can all grow. Organizations where when you've done projects, you build in that reflection and development time so that you can really understand from it, well, what went well? Why? What didn't go so well? Why not? So what would we do differently next time? People who can build that in, really create that environment where you can learn and grow. The second one is really this whole clarity and meaning in terms of your work. That actually, if you have got that individual connection and understanding of why you are doing your work, then that actually builds an incredible amount of resilience. It's what gets you over the bumps when it's all a bit hard and a bit difficult, because you've got that end goal in mind of what you're trying to achieve. That can be powerful, and that links back to what we were talking about yesterday in terms of the importance of purpose and having that really crystal clear. Again, you can see how our minds are wired towards this in terms of how you give your brain instructions. It likes to have the real clarity in terms of what you want it to do. You'll have all seen those things. If I say to you now, don't think about chocolate, you're all thinking about chocolate right now, aren't you? Sorry, your start for the day. Whereas actually, if I give the brain a positive instruction in terms of, thinking about eating bananas, then you're actually giving it that really positive, this is where I want you to go. And your subconscious processes that, and it's like you're wiring it in terms of this is the direction. So that clarity and meaning gives you that incredible way to actually be able to build resilience and move forwards. The next one is all about confidence. And it's very interesting. Again, there's been quite a lot of research that shows that actually our brains, because they're wired to, if you think about that limbic system, it's wired to actually be able to spot threats. And so in terms of its signaling, it's attuned to spot things that could actually suggest things are going wrong. 5 times more receptors on that than the things that tell you, hey, it's all fine, it's all cool. So knowing that the voice on our shoulder telling us that we're rubbish, it's a disaster, it's all too difficult, that this cognitive fog is because we're rubbish, we've done something wrong, is a lot bigger than the one saying, hey, this is normal, this is what's happening to your brain. That insight can really help you think about that from an individual and an organization perspective of how do you actually turn that round. And on a really simple one, to think about just having the ratio of 5 times more things that you're saying that are building your confidence versus the one that maybe is sort of taking you down. And you can train yourself to do it. It's why affirmations that might sound a bit new agey can be incredibly effective for people. And the final one is really playing on the idea of connections. Social connection is an incredible way of building resilience. And again, it's how our brains are wired. There's quite a lot of evidence now that the way our brains are wired, the receptors, the hormones that are triggered, that actually that social connection is something that actually triggers things that actually make you feel better about yourself, your reward receptors in your brain, if you like. And so being able to really sort of think about, if social connections are important, what are you doing to invest and sustain in them? Who's giving you energy? Who's taking it? Have you got those in balance? So those are the sort of 4 areas that we know build resilience. The growth mindset, stroke adaptability, meaning and clarity in what you're doing, confidence, building that confidence, and social connections. So you might be sitting there saying, well, that's all very well, there's a nice load of theory, but how do I actually practically translate that into things that I can take back and do that can really start to build the resilience of my organization, such that we can really start to capitalize on the opportunities that the world around us presents. So it may or may not surprise you that with the title of this talk being all about creating resilient organizations, I'm going to offer you 3 creation opportunities. The first one is all about creating stories. Now, cultures of organizations are actually part of what builds them, is the stories that we tell. When when people get together for a drink and they're reminiscing about things that have happened in work, what are the stories that they tell? Are they stories of disasters and things that have gone wrong? Or are they the stories around, hey, look what we did? Wasn't that amazing? And this situation, having lived through COVID-19, actually presents an amazing opportunity as organizations to say, well, what have we actually learned from this? And to actually choose the stories that we want to carry forward from this period. picking people in the organization who are the storytellers. You'll know the people who are just those people that actually carry the stories of an organization because they're creating them, they're sharing them, they're telling them, they're engaging. Those are people who are incredibly powerful in organizations for this cultural glue of the stories that we create. And I'd really encourage you with your teams to create the space to be able to say, right, as we're going into the autumn, and we've been through this incredible, unusual period since February, to actually say, let's look back. Let's look back at the things that have happened, of what we've achieved, to really be able to take pride in the work you've done, to think about how your work has connected to your purpose and meaning, to build your confidence, to say, do you know what, that was really hard, and yet look what we managed to achieve. And to also say, and look what we've learned. Because in doing that, the storytelling and the stories that you choose to create and curate and carry forward with you are ways in which you're actually hardwiring some of those key tools for organizational resilience into the very DNA of how you operate. So that's my first creation. Create your stories, create the space to be really intentional about the stories that you want to carry forward. My second creation is intentionally creating the environment that you want to take forward. And in doing that, what it is that you want to leave behind. We've done this in my team and had the opportunity for each team member to actually say, right, in this situation, what are the things that have become possible that weren't possible before that we'd like to keep? What are the things that we've missed and we'd really like to find a way to create them in the future again as we go forward? And what are things that really, do you know what? It took this crisis for us to recognize that these actually, they might have got us to today, but we don't want to carry them into the future. So creating that intentional design of how you want your organization to operate on a day-to-day basis, and choosing intentionally what you're now going to leave behind in your culture is really important. I don't know about you, but one of the things that has been incredibly powerful is finding that in this new environment where a lot of us have been working from home, is that we've been able to be massively more agile. We can bring together people with a wide variety of perspectives on really important issues much more quickly, to get input in a really thoughtful and insightful way, and to be able to then play that back to people and move forward. Oftentimes, those are the types of big drawing together sessions that maybe would have taken 6 weeks to get everybody's diary together, that suddenly we can actually realistically pull together people for a quick hour next week to be able to bring things together. Imagine if we were able to create that flexibility and that agility in how we operate. So that's an example for us. You'll all have different ones, but I think that opportunity to really intentionally create what you're going to carry forward into the future and what you're going to leave behind is a very powerful conversation. And the third creation is creating the opportunities to actually work together in groups. You might be sitting there saying, well, come on, that's obvious, we do that already. However, I just encourage you just to reflect in terms of how you're operating, the extent to which it's involving people going off into different aspects of projects and working alone on things, versus bringing people together on the core things to your purpose to actually be able to work really properly, co-working on a project and creating together. That social connection and value you have from when people are working together intensely on a project creates the space not only for people to be doing valuable work, but also for them to be connecting and engaging and having fun in the process of doing that work. And I think that finding that space for people to actually be working together on projects rather than working on their bit of a project alone, is a tremendous way to, again, build that DNA of social connection and resilience into the organisation. So I don't pretend to have all of the answers. All I know is that when we spend some time thinking about our organisations as these ecosystems, with each human brain in there being wired in a certain way, that when we can understand how we work with that brain, that we're giving it that growth mindset, we're giving it the meaning, we're giving it the confidence, we're creating connections, and we intentionally create the environment to enable people to thrive, we really can set ourselves up to do incredible things within each of our organisations. So look, enjoy the rest of the day, and tomorrow I'm delighted that we'll be having the opportunity to explore some questions together. So it'll be great to hear both the things that you've been exploring and experimenting with in this whole area, and to be able to just really have a conversation to explore it a bit more deeply. So thank you for your time, and see you tomorrow.